Hey, everybody, welcome to the first weekly podcast of the season. I am, of course, Samson Folk. This is the once a week podcast, i.e., weekly podcast where we talk about the Raptors. And typically, it is either a mailbag or a guest. There's not enough stuff to mailbag about. And we have a wonderful guest in house today. In house is an odd term to use considering we're doing this via the internet. But we have a huge guest today, first of the season, Esfandiar Baraheni. And he's here to talk with us. But S, you have news about yourself that you have to share with the audience before we get into all the Raptors stuff.
Yeah, I appreciate you as always, Samson. You're a real one. Listen, ladies and gentlemen, I'm moving over to SDPN Sports, the Steve Dangle Podcast Network. Going to be doing NBA content there, a little bit of reporting on the side as well as their lead NBA reporter. But essentially, what the deal is, I'm going to be hosting a podcast, which more information will be coming forward in the next couple of weeks. You will hear about it, I'm sure, ad nauseum. I will also have a newsletter, which will be really fun, and I'm very, very excited to show you guys. There's going to be a lot of how to say it. I'm gonna be really showing off my creative juices there. I will say that, and trying to add some flavor to the world of basketball. And yeah, when it comes to the YouTube videos that you guys are used to from me, you will be seeing that regularly, weekly. But it won't be on the Scores channel. It will be on SDPN's YouTube channel. So I'm excited to bring basketball to a very new and different audience compared to what it has been over the past couple of years. But make no mistake, the Raptors stuff will still continue. So yeah, I'm excited for it, but who knows? We'll see what happens in the next couple of weeks.
Yeah, and so for anybody listening or watching, you probably are familiar with S if you're a Raptors fan, and there's even a better chance, if you pay attention to anything that goes on the wide world of sports, I should say, that you've seen a video of his at the Score. I love S's work, and I'll follow it anywhere, so you should too. Now, we follow the Raptors anywhere over here, and we're following them into a 1-2 start. There are some interesting things happening that we'll, of course, talk about, but 1-2. Everybody knew that they were going to have a tough start to the year, or at least it was going to be a hard climb to a good record because they're facing a lot of good teams off the start. Cleveland, very good team. They're going to be in the playoff picture. Well, they're going to be a playoff team. Brooklyn is going to be a playoff team. Miami is going to be a playoff team. Some of those teams might actually be in the upper echelon, perhaps all three of the East. And so the Raptors go 1-2 to start. They have a chance to even up their record and their season record against Miami tomorrow. But yeah, 1-2. How do you feel about it so far, S?
Distraught. I'm tank for tank for Wemby. Let's do it. No, obviously, look, it's 3 games. It's tough to take away too much when there's 79 more of these left, or 78. 79. 79. I'm right. Yeah, I'm right. Yeah. So it's hard to take away too much from this, other than the fact that you are right. There are good teams that they're facing, and they will continue to face over this next week or so to end out the month. I think the one takeaway here is that there is a lot of experimentation. I think they are trying a lot of things. I think there is this level of like, all right, let's see what we can put out there. And you can always appreciate that, especially when they're doing it against good teams. So I think that's the thing that I've realized is like, hey, they're still, even though, this was talked up a lot preseason, the continuity of the Raptors, even though there is this continuity, it just feels like they're still, ironing out the regular kinks of, what you have for a basketball team for the first couple of weeks.
And that continuity kind of got stolen from them, right? Otto
Yeah.
Porter Jr. is not the continuity, but he's supposed to be a veteran who has all the easy plug-in pieces of his game. A plug-in guy. All these things, If he wants to have a game where he scores 20, takes like 8 threes because that's what the defense has given him, that's what happens. Maybe he gets some offensive rebounds if the other front line is small. Just an easy plug-in guy. He's injured. Has not played anything in a Raptors jersey yet. He looks good shooting in practice, though, as I can attest to. Chris Boucher, like the plus-minus king of the Raptors last year. Not in that he's better than the starters, but that in those transitional lineups next to the starters, he's such a great bench player and able to dominate a lot of other bench players and compete with other starting lineup players the league over. He is a guy who is not playing for the Raptors currently, injured.
Mm-hmm.
That continuity got smacked right onto its butt straight away. And what's been left has been the heroics of Pascal Siakam to try and lift up a team offensively. And there's been some good defensive stretches, some really bad defensive stretches. But I kind of want to start with Pascal Siakam because that is the place to start discussing these Raptors, I think, first and foremost. So your thoughts?
Like, just is the expression to be doing with Pascal right now. It's just, you know, I said it before the season, but I really do think that this was like he was coming into form as like this. He was comfortable. Like, it just looked like towards the end of the season, he had reached a comfort level within his own game. That mid-range, area that he likes to operate in is now his playground. There's a difference between, and you use this term a lot. Everybody uses this term a lot. There's a difference between like
No, just me.
probing. there's a difference between like probing and manipulating and like just dictating what the defense is going to do. And last year, I think what Pascal was trying to do is probing. It's like, okay, what is the defense going to do now? What am I supposed to do now? What am I trying to do? Now it's, I am going to make the defense do this. And I am forcing the issue here, whether it be, getting the double team from the corner, or like he's essentially receiving 2 or 3 body like every single possession. All that stuff is he's creating that, and he's creating an advantage with it. I think it's so amazing to see him be at this high level of a playmaker. And like, I don't know. It's early in the season. There's only 3 games, ladies and gentlemen, but just the fact that he is like here, I'll pull up some stats real quick for you.
Pull him up.
Isolation possessions. All right. He's pretty high in the frequencies. Like, he's one of the only guys who's kind of eligible this early into the season. 1.19 points per possession, which is just disgusting work. It's right there with, the Embiids, the Jason Tatums, the Kevin Durants of the world. It's nice. Okay. As the pick and roll ball handler, which he is doing at about the same frequency he did last season. It is 0.9 points per possession. So he is still generating points, and at a pretty decent clip. Hold on, where I have this other one. As a post player, he is also generating 1.1 points per possession right now. So look, like, yes, it's 3 games in, but his level of dominance has just been so entertaining to watch. And for anybody who does think the 1 and 2 start is worrisome, I think there's a case to be made that it doesn't matter, because just how amazing Pascal has been.
That's probably a really great point, is that when we think about like LeBron, so Pascal isn't LeBron level, but Pascal is one of the best players in the league. If a LeBron team or a team with a top 15 player, let's say, starts out 1 and 2, there's kind of a comfort with the fan base, because they're like, we're going to get that back. Heads or tails, you win some games, you lose some games, but we have this guy on our side who's going to drive us towards victories. Pascal, since getting healthy, did that in the second half of the season with Fred injured, with Gary on an extended cold streak from downtown, with OG injured, was carrying these, skeleton crew teams to a lot of wins, and eventually vaulted the Raptors up the Eastern Conference standings. This year, the team should be deeper once they're healthy. Fred is still just as good, despite a bit of a changed role, as you said. Well, as we'll talk about, I should say.
Yeah, we will.
And,
yeah,
and we'll talk about that, of course. But the big thing is that Pascal looks every bit of a superstar. And that, I love the point you make about probing versus manipulating, is that probing is the exercise of seeing how the defense responds to you. And manipulating is doing things in anticipation of how the defense will respond. Yeah. And a really great, I'll throw this one up on screen. It's the play against Brooklyn where Scottie got a dunk, and it's the dunk that Scottie blew against Miami, where Pascal,
oh, right.
Pascal draws the double, right? That double comes. Pascal picks up his dribble and heads out, and then the low man, he baits the low man to shoot to the corner. But then flips that pivot around and finds Scottie on the short side twice. And this is knowing how defenses are going to respond. They think, okay, he's about to escape into space and sling it to the corner. And so he's using that to move the defense around the way he sees fit, rather than kind of being like, oh, what's going to happen here? There's some premeditation there. That's an important part of every single scorer. Premeditation is a huge part of playmaking. It's why, like, Dakota, who does like a great job with
really good work.
G League, G League stuff. He put up the Raptors hammer play and was like, look at this pass that Pascal made. And he knows it's a hammer play. Most people do. But if you didn't know it was a hammer play, you just see Pascal throwing the ball to an empty corner where suddenly a player ends up, right? That looks like that looks like a Jokic pass. If you don't know that that's a set play for the Raptors. And that's kind of the benefit of Pascal knowing how the defense will respond, is that these defensive rotations in a way become set actions where Pascal knows the read. That's that proactive passing, that he's reaching that level. And along with the fact that he bullied every Claxton, Durant,
Doesn't
Royce
matter.
O'Neal,
Did not
anybody who
matter.
anybody who steps up to him in the
Yeah.
middle of the court, he can outwork them, he can outsmart them, and he can out-length them in that space. And there's plenty of finesse and shooting touch there too. The defense, I guess we could talk about a little bit. Pascal, very interesting because as we saw against Miami, I think Pascal had a poor defensive game. He was being asked to stick Jimmy Butler one-on-one. There were some rotations that I would say he objectively missed. And we are going to start entering that superstar conversation that Pascal typically can avoid because his work rate is so high, but you carry so much weight offensively. Perhaps it affects that defense. I'm curious what you've thought about that side of the floor for him through 3 games, let's say.
It's sort of weird because we've talked about this before, but like the fact that defensive metrics just don't know how to calculate what Pascal is as a defender. I also think in a lot of ways, like, yes, through the he's being asked to do much conversation can also be made just on the defensive end. Like, yes, if we're talking about offense and defense, there is this workload thing that comes into play. But even on the defensive end, he's just being asked to plug so many holes all the time that it feels like, man, a missed rotation. I hear you, brother. Like, it's all good, because at the same time, if he's missing a rotation, it's probably because someone else had missed a rotation a little bit earlier on, and he's trying to recover from that to kind of wear both hats, if you will, or trying to be at two places at once. Man, he's not the Flash. You know, he can't vibrate so quickly between two different frequencies to be in two different spots. But like, that's really what the Raptors defense asks of him. And it asks the same of OG too, which I'm sure we'll talk about. But those are two guys that, like, they're the crux of the Raptors defense. I know we talk about Fred. I know, like, you know, there is Precious and how enamored we are of like his potential to be this great defender. But it's interesting to see Pascal just being like the anchor. Just really, he whatever he kind of dictates, he is. And the other thing is, like, you know, you've mentioned it a lot on your podcast. A lot of people have brought it up too, but the way that the
Just
Raptors
me. That's my running
yeah,
joke for this episode.
just Samson. But no, the Raptors obviously switch from zone to man, and then they do like this pseudo version of it every now and then too. Like, to be able to anchor a defense that is that complicated and that reactionary, yeah, you're gonna miss some rotations. There's gonna be some moments, especially, you know, with how much of a workload you're being asked on the offensive end, that it's just inevitable. I think that's just part of, you know, learning to become a top 15 player, a top 10 player, whatever you want to call them. But I think in terms of his importance to the defense, there's no question that the man is like number one on that pecking order, because not a lot works without him, and his ability to kind of just cover so much ground. So yeah, weird on the defensive metric stuff, man. It always bothers me, but yeah.
So yeah, the defensive metrics, I don't trust them for that reason. They miss on a lot of players, to be fair. And so Pascal, when we're talking about some of the letdowns defensively, if you're a fan and you recognize that Pascal's shooting out to somebody who's about to take a shot and that shot looks open, that doesn't necessarily mean that that was Pascal's missed rotation. He led the league in closeouts last year, and it's not that Pascal is the guy who's always closing out and that teams somehow orchestrate an offense that it's always Pascal's guy who ends up shooting. It's that Pascal is oftentimes recovering out to missed rotations from other players. However, you can look at Pascal as the low man because Pascal stepped up to the defender. The pass goes out to the corner. That is the guy who is on ball. That's their rotation to the corner. If that gets passed up above the break, somebody formed up, that is Pascal's rotation. Last night against the Heat, I think he missed 2, and it was because it looked fatigue or maybe just absent-mindedness, but that's the kind of stuff that you can't really have happening. But I urge the audience that every time you see a Pascal late closeout, that does not mean that it was his closeout.
His late closeout, yeah.
Yeah.
Hey, I'll actually I'll ask you a question on this, or like maybe just add a point to the Pascal argument. Do you think, because, and Nurse brought it up about the emphasis on defensive rebounding this season, especially for Pascal, right? Do you think that makes it so that that closeout number gets lower this season? Because he's going to be like, instead of running out to the guy, he's going to be, you know, crashing the boards. So
I guess you would hope so, right?
Yeah.
because it, and that's also I have a tough time, we've talked about this before, but I have kind of a tough time conceiving how Pascal manages. It's like he's at the cookout, right? The plate is overflowing and he
Yeah.
keeps he keeps eating. How do you fit so much on one plate, sir? Towering up to the sky. And if he's not only the guy who closes out the most defensive possessions for the Raptors, but also the guy who has the most closeouts for the Raptors, and the guy who has the most miles traveled per game for the Raptors, and the guy who has the highest usage percentage on offense for the Raptors, and it gets doubled. I'm expecting he'll be at least top 5 in the league as far as doubles faced this year.
Yeah.
I and isolations will be top 5. All of that, the listener's probably thinking, wait, yeah, how the hell could a guy do that? And I'm sure Pascal is doing that and saying, how the hell could a guy do that?
Yeah.
So and also, this is a guy who, through 3 games, we've seen him guarding Donovan Mitchell at the point of attack. We've seen him guarding Kyrie Irving at the point of attack, KD, Evan Mobley, Jimmy Butler. What is a guy supposed to do? The
Yeah.
workload is, quite frankly, it's too much. But I am glad you brought up the defensive rebounding, because he's been just awesome rebounding. But I feel like, roughly 15 minutes on Pascal is plenty. We'll have a whole season to talk about him. You with the Steve Dangle Podcast Network, myself with Raptors Republic over here. But Fred,
Damn right.
that's your guy, Fred
Yeah.
VanVleet. Take us where you want with this conversation. I'm just kind of gonna follow you as far as thoughts on Fred.
There seems to be a conversation that's being started on Twitter about this, and I guess I'll just piggyback on that conversation. And it's the fact that like he's not taking as many shots as he
Mhm.
did last season. It was at 16.9. I think I checked today. Last season, he, throughout the 3 games that he's played this year, it's 9, 9, and 11. Right. Um, that's not typical from Fred. I think that's an area where a lot of people expected him to maybe take a step back in his shot making, or just in general his attempts, because other guys, there's different mouths to feed, quote unquote. Like, there's the OGs of the world who want more opportunities. There's Scottie, there's Gary, right? And I'm pretty sure we've seen that Gary has gotten a big chunk of Fred's shots. In terms of like, if you're looking at the overall, how many guys have what amount of shots, Pascal obviously leads everybody. Wait, sorry, go ahead.
So this is an interesting conversation. If I said that Gary's getting more shots, but not necessarily Fred shots, would that make sense to you?
Yes. Yeah, it would.
So
Yeah.
so when I think of Gary, there's some initiation stuff going on there, but we
Mhm.
look at last night, and Gary took a lot of shots.
Yep.
In fact, how many? He took over 20 last night, did
Yeah,
he
I think
not?
it was like 23 or something.
Yeah.
I don't know. Yeah.
And so why Gary took all those shots typically was because they were stacking his actions with Pascal. And so he had a good shooting game, especially from 3, which helped the Raptors a lot. And so those weren't necessarily, I guess, initiation shots. Like,
Right.
this isn't a guy initiating offense where Fred typically does,
Right.
but this is a guy who is playing on the same side of the floor as Pascal as he's getting doubled, which was a great adjustment by the Raptors, by Pascal, and by Gary himself. And so I would actually agree that OG is probably getting more of the initiation touches than Fred. And then
Fair.
also Fred is taking less shots on his own initiation touches. So like, the shots are definitely lower. The process has also changed a fair bit as well, if that makes sense to you.
No, it does. And I wonder if we ever end up finding a balance there, because I
Mhm.
don't think this is the end result of what it's going to be. I think it's a gradual process of figuring out where that sweet spot is. I don't know what amount of shots makes the most sense for Fred, but I think like, look, last year he showed that in terms of initiation, he can at least get downhill. Obviously, finishing is one of the biggest struggles for him, but he had one of the biggest pass out rates, I believe, from drives in the league, if not
Yeah,
number one,
it
right?
was like 60%.
Yeah. And look, that's a way to create offense in its own right, driving kick scenarios, try to find shooters, right? I just think in a lot of ways that isn't present through these 3 games. I haven't seen him trying to get downhill as much and trying to create from there. Maybe it is the whole off ball thing that is maybe affecting him mentally a little bit, where he just feels like he shouldn't be taking as much shots. But I'm not sure. I think right now there is like this figuring out period. And like, to what I said, at the start of the pod, even though this team has continuity, there is like a shift in the power rankings, the
Right.
hierarchy of what the team is. And that's going to be a whole thing for them. And Fred is a massive part of that. It's like, look, he's trying to figure out where he makes sense. And if you talk about scalability, there's almost no one on this team, maybe other than Pascal, who's like his play is completely scalable to whatever team he gets put on. Fred
Mhm.
can play on any team,
Yep.
contender, playoff contender, playing team, tanking team, right? So, yeah, that's
He
the spiel on Fred, I guess.
Fred could plug into any lineup, any 5-guy lineup. He would find a way to boot somebody out and still be have harmony with the rest of the players. He's just so good offensively. And that kind of once I don't trust defensive metrics, but I do trust the gravity metrics and as far as like how guys pull, because that's just player tracking data, right? People scrape
Yeah.
it from NBA.com /stats. And I find it interesting that Fred, once those come out and we're like 15 games into the season, Fred is going to be ranking in that top right corner as far as the efficiency and gravity, I think, because
Yeah.
not only are we seeing the shots go down for Fred, but we're seeing the assists go up. And the interesting thing, right? We see the assists. What are they at currently? 8 assists a game. He was at
Yeah.
6.7 last year. And this is from a guy who you said is not doing the drive and kick stuff. What is Fred doing? He's in that initial action with Pascal. And the
Connect.
team, yes,
Yeah.
connect. The team freaks the hell out because they're like, oh, wait, Fred's open, Fred's open, Fred's open. Sometimes sending 2 guys to that closeout, right? And
Yep.
Fred is left to pump and shoot to the corner, whether
Yep.
it's OG, whether it's Gary. And so Fred has become a connector in more senses than an initiator. And I would like to see a bit more aggressiveness as far as initiation because Pascal's not on the floor every time. And sometimes in a game against the Heat, Pascal is receiving way too much attention and the defense gets to play way too close on him to like make that work. If
Right.
Pascal is getting so much attention, Fred is an all-star player. OG, Gary, Precious, whomever, right? Scottie, once he's healthy again. These guys, if they get a weaker side of the floor because Pascal has so much attention, you have to be able to play in that space. You
Yeah.
have to be able to make a defense. And Fred, I don't blame him because he's trying to find that thin balance between where he was and where he needs to be. Really, really tough when your role has changed, especially after an all-star year. And
Yeah.
so he's currently acclimating to that, but he isn't being aggressive enough when the opportunity arises or when the defense kind of forces that hand. But with
Yeah.
that said, this is a guy shooting what 45% from the floor, 44% from 3. You know, he hasn't missed a free throw yet. The connective stuff has been good. I
I'll
feel
say
yeah, go ahead.
I'll just add one thing about Fred. I think like the fact that he's also willing,
Mhm.
like there's not a lot of players that would be just willing to be like, all right, I'm gonna take 7 less shots a game, you know,
Mhm.
and I'm also gonna not be this guy who's initiating every action, going downhill, getting the pick and roll, and then kind of we go from there. I'm not gonna be that guy for you anymore. You know, start of the season last year, this guy was having the same usage rate as Trae Young, same usage rate as
Mhm.
Trae Young, and it's like he's 180, completely different type of player. The other thing I wanted to say is, look, the man's hands are just incredible, dude. It's
Yeah.
like these claws, man, and the defense has not missed a beat yet. I know last year with the whole injury and the knee thing, it was a concern moving forward, but man, like really the defensive activity from him has been phenomenal at the point of attack, and the claws, they're just incredible, man.
Yeah, dude. It's and not only, at the point of attack being disruptive, that's we were there on media day, right? You and I sat next to each other. Everybody's asking Nick Nurse questions. And
Yeah.
I believe as Vivek asked about, hey, Fred's minutes, any thoughts on how that's gonna be? And Nick's answer was like, yeah, I'm gonna play him less. Is there some snark to it, which was fun for everybody in the room. But he backed that up with his reasoning, which was that who else do we have to guard all the pick and roll possessions across the NBA besides Fred?
He's
And
right.
what we've seen through the first couple games is that OG, Scottie, and Pascal have guarded more of those possessions, but Fred is still the main guy. And
Yeah.
you still can't get away from that. Malachi playing last night is maybe a big step in that direction. I guess we'll see. If he hits catch and shoot threes, he'll stick in the rotation on this team without a question, which he
Yeah.
did last night. But yeah, Fred defensively, I should say, kind of making sure that he can move guys off of their initial action, blow up a screen here and there, get them wide enough that they have to reset these possessions. And then when he's not involved, being so aggressive and so calculated with those dig downs, his defense, I think, has just been sublime to start the year. So the offense stuff is a work in progress, which it was always going to be. I've never seen a player do what Fred is trying to do harmoniously, like perfectly. It's
Yeah.
tough to find that balance, but the defense, it has not struggled whatsoever. perhaps we should talk about OG then, because the yin and yang of Fred's initiation possessions, and even so much so that OG I know has been getting a lot of negative
Oh
press,
yeah.
but
Yeah.
perhaps I shouldn't say press, negative commentary from the internet at large.
Yeah.
And I think that it definitely makes sense to have qualms with how the outcomes of these possessions. And I know that the conversation will always be, why don't we have Gary initiating these possessions instead of OG? And before I take a crack at it, do you wanna like wax poetic about the difference? Do you have thoughts on that?
I'll give bullet points because I know you'll be able to wax poetic much more poetically than I can right now. I think the big reason you don't want to shift it over to Gary, and in the pursuit of experimenting, because I think a lot of people have brought that up with OG, myself included. It's like, look, this is a trial and error type thing, and I saw some people say, hey, why not experiment with Gary? The reason is that, one, Gary isn't as adept of a playmaker. He just doesn't look at the other players on the court a lot of the times. He's not making the reads that you kind of want him to. He's not comfortable in pick and roll situations. The dribble handoffs are better, I think, but there's not enough there in terms of creation outside of his own shots. And when it comes to his own shots, we saw it last night, especially in the first half. It ends up that he is a tough shot taker and sometimes ends up being a tough shot maker. I think that's the way his own self creation is. Now, you mentioned the whole Pascal angle of him kind of settling in, and I completely agree with that. That's why he had that good second half and got back into it. But the first half, you saw him take a lot of hard shots, a lot of difficult shots. He's not creating any separation. He's not creating any advantage. The thing that OG actually does is he gets downhill. He creates an advantage. And the plus side is he's become a pretty good playmaker. He's doing these dump off passes. He is kicking it out. All of this is kind of giving favor to OG in the sense that he should have these creation opportunities, or just have more opportunity to have this playground to just try these things, because Gary doesn't have those skills. And look, maybe he ends up developing these skills in the next couple of years, but OG is so much further along that it's like, look, this is a guy that can turn the corner this season if he gets a couple of more opportunities every game. That's something to invest in, versus Gary is not at that point in his creation kind of development, if you will, if that makes sense.
Yeah. So there's a play that perfectly illustrates the good aspect of Gary that also kind of comes face to face with the limitations of him on ball. So it was one of Pascal's 6 assists in the last 5 minutes and 30 seconds against Brooklyn, is that they run an action with Pascal and Gary. Gary's shooting out and Gary receives the pass. They give Pascal that hedge, he throws it back to Gary. Ben Simmons over pursued Gary. So Gary actually got to the rim, that inside hand,
Oh yeah,
right
yeah,
hand
yeah.
finish at the rim. Now, step away. I'll put it on screen, but why isn't there any help defense? Because it's Gary. And so what the good thing about that is that in these clutch possessions, we've seen it, the second half of last year, the early part of this year, we've seen him finish at the rim a couple times. You can probably think of it in mind, is that Gary, if he beats his guy, he will, like if he gets clearance, if his guy cheats on a play, he can shoot the gap. He'll have a layup at the rim. Why?
Yeah.
Because teams they're so used to not providing help with Gary. And that is the stark contrast. Outcomes are different between Gary and OG, but the process is that OG, when he gets downhill, the defense freaks out. They start moving people over. That creates a tree of options, right? It starts branching out. You can make this decision, this decision, this decision, this decision. But I said this to Joe Wolfond, is that Gary's decision-making tree is like a decision-making branch. There's just one thing he's ever going to do.
Yeah, that's exactly it. Yeah.
And that means that teams are not going to respond to him. They're going to respond to him one way and one way only. The guy who's on Gary, defend Gary. If Gary makes those shots that he usually makes, tough, and the Raptors on the other side, they say good. And Gary is a very talented shot maker. But the thing that fuels offense in the NBA is not tough shot making. It's the ability to bend the defense and open up a myriad of options to make decisions upon. And we saw it was bad in Miami as far as the outcomes. OG was getting to about 8 feet, 7 feet, coming from either side, getting to those spots on the floor, missing a pop shot, kind of dribbling into his foot, recovering, trying to shoot the ball out into a reset, stuff like that. Bad outcomes. But the defense is collapsing. And once he gets better at making those decisions, the options are there. And against Cleveland, what we saw was OG getting into the defense, finishing and making laydowns and completely changing the way that Cleveland got to defend in that second half. That was the big deal. And on top of that, even as OG struggles at this stuff, he's making his threes and he's defending well. The Raptors, very clearly, I don't think anybody who's been watching it can say that they're good as far as creation. Fred needs to extend himself a little bit more. OG, you need more control, of course. Gary, when last night he figures out like, oh yeah, I'm just going to play off of Pascal. I'm going to have so many open shots. He's such a good shooter. Perfect. But when he gets that empty side dribble handoff with Precious Achiuwa, and Achiuwa makes the first good roll of his life, and he's open,
nothing. Yeah,
and Gary completely misses that read, gets to about 14 feet and misses his shot. That's the stuff where you're like, oh man, about 4 other guys on this roster would have made that pass, and it would have been a dunk, right? And so it's opening yourself up to more opportunities and about bending the defense. The trade-off currently is probably still you want Gary having the ball because OG's decision-making isn't good enough. And, well, no, I shouldn't say this. His ability to stay on balance and make plays hasn't been good enough that the process is creating all these different outcomes that are good. And Gary is so good at shooting that tough shot making that creates like, okay, how many points per possession are we getting on this? Where Gary's just kind of like, you flip the coin, maybe it's in, maybe it's out. The Raptors, when it comes to OG, that's the potential of it all. It's like, man, this guy gets to spots on the floor. What would it look like if there were good outcomes attached to that? And maybe you believe there will be, maybe you believe there won't be, but that's the rationale.
Can we kind of talk about the balance thing real quick?
Sure. I love talking about balance.
Okay, I mean, I'm not a biometric guy. I'm not into body stuff, but like, what do you think that is? Is it because like I get it. It's tough to be going downhill full speed and then have to stop on a dime, try to react while also staying in position, while being like pushed around by guys that are trying to defend you. I get it, but like, what is that thing that he needs to get to become a little bit more poised is it the handle? You know, is it like him fumbling the ball towards near the basket? What is it that you think would help?
Every single body type has its advantages and has its disadvantages. I've talked to, he's an MD from Korea. He goes by Polar. I've written an article with him. Yeah. And so he might bring up a guy like Jared Culver, who is not a good NBA player at this point. He might not even be an NBA player anymore.
I don't think he's on a roster right now, no.
But he might be able to pull up a clip of Jared Culver taking like this drive and being able to, even though the defender's on his right hip, Jared Culver can get skinny, kind of cross his legs a little bit and plant his right foot. And like they would refer to that as like ankle flexibility and like, hip stuff, biomechanical stuff, right?
Yeah.
And when he talks about, this is what I wrote about with Scottie, and OG was also included in that article, is that OG and Scottie, and we see this with Scottie, when he drives, he's finding his own counters that work with his body, and it's about getting wide. Scottie is never once trying to get small. Mm-hmm. And when we think about getting small, it's Donovan Mitchell getting wide on a pick and roll, seeing the blitz, crossing his feet, getting tight and exploding through a gap, getting small. And OG with long legs, high hips is a guy who, this is why he's so good defensively, he operates with big steps, covering up big spaces, which means in defense, you're trying to take up space. In offense, sometimes you're trying to get through little ones. And we see this with Pascal as well, right? Like the spins, getting like his heels are basically touching each other as he's spinning around. Whereas like a Scottie spin is not like this tight pirouette, but it's like almost like a hop step, turning
giant
around. Yes, these big space-taking steps. That's the difference, is that when OG, just because of the way he's built, is trying to get tight and little, it's like stilts almost. it's really, really tough just the way a body is built. So he has to have more counters. His counter, for the most part, as people recognize, I'm probably losing people at this point. My apologies,
Is
but
that the kind of step back?
it's the bump into
Yeah.
the step back. So it's like,
Yeah.
instead of getting little, getting that big bump and getting big. But the balance has to get better on how he's absorbing his weight into that step back and then finishing as well. And so it's just sometimes he gets sped up and he's getting out of his comfort zone.
Right.
OG honestly is a guy who on these drives, he needs to be able to slow down. And that's where the handle development is really important, because when you go slow, you have to have a good handle. We
Yeah.
saw this with Pascal. Pascal was going slow in the middle of the court a lot of the time. And the reason why he can do that is because he has the ball on a string, escape dribble, re-engage, escape dribble, re-engage, keep working yourself down. He can't attack fast because the defense wants him to, so that they can time their help side rotations. If he can, navigate the middle of the court as a slow player and then burst or beat his guy up with a strength advantage, that's how OG can really work on this kind of stuff. But it's very, very tough for anybody listening. My apologies for all the biomechanics
That's why you
stuff.
need to subscribe to Raptors Republic, ladies and gentlemen. Just putting it out there. A little
Yeah.
halftime advertisement for you.
But also, since that's the OG spiel, that's why
Yeah.
I believe in OG. I believe that he's able to get to dangerous places on the court, and I think he can develop those counters. And just to talk about the Gary stuff, offensive process, there's been stretches where Gary has been bad, but it's going back to last year. Gary had a really wonderful stretch playmaking off of pin downs and stuff like that,
Yeah.
and dribble handoffs. I would love to see that reemerge. And the shooting is in such a he's a really great shooter. So as long as Gary's on this team, who knows what happens with that extension, with the contract, everything like that. But he's a valuable part of the team currently. The offense will continue to be very important. And while I lean OG, I understand why some people might find it an easier watch to watch Gary operate, and kind of, okay, the jumper didn't go down, rather than all of the calamities that can adjoin an OG drive or something like that. But
Yeah.
I do lean OG. I guess Scottie is probably, unless do you have any Gary OG thoughts before we get out this little?
No, I agree with you. And like I think, with when it comes to Gary, there is always the talk of the extension and all that stuff. And we might kind of, me and you together, we might end up being in that conversation too and mentioning it a lot. But like I totally agree with you, man. The value to this team is huge, especially when he is hitting his shots. It's just astronomical how much better this team is in the half court. So totally agree that like the value of Gary is very much so important to what the best version of this team can be. But it's just the idea of like, look, OG, there is the potential to see more than what we see, and this is why he ends up getting the opportunity more.
Yeah, it seems more apparent where OG can improve and become even more dangerous than Gary does. So
Yeah.
Scottie Barnes, I think Scottie's been awesome to start the year. Fits and starts to some degree, but once Scottie figures out how he can insert himself into a game, because as we're seeing with Ben Simmons, if you're a guy who doesn't shoot the ball well, nothing is intuitive about playing offense in the NBA, because the
Yeah.
ball can't just come to you above the break and you're like, oh, I know what to do with this. If you're a guy who thrives on the inside, and especially as a wing who initiates offense, everything is about reading your defender, reading the second level, taking these little advantages, finding gaps to get to the rim, because teams want to protect that rim. And Scottie, once he figures out his space in the game, God, he's really good in it. We saw it in
Yeah.
that Miami game, right? Everybody's loading up on Pascal. The Miami defenders are really good at shooting the gaps to get out to shooters, and then recovering and gapping so that those shooters, whether it's Fred or Gary, aren't making these runs to the rim. So it's a reset out, and it's just like, are you guys going to take these semi-contested threes? Do you want your offense to be like living off of that? Because this is how we're playing you. And then Scottie was the salve. He was
Yeah.
like, "Oh, the ball comes to me. Who is guarding me? I will ram them under the basket, and I'll go up and I'll finish." That was perfect, because Miami wants to play this like, we have a bunch of quick guards and we're going to cover space and all this kind of stuff. And Scottie's like, put one on me, see what happens.
Yeah.
So he figured that out quickly. He also did that to some degree against Brooklyn. That's why I've always been a fan of the Scottie Pascal duo. I wrote about it early last year. I still believe it. It was great in the playoffs. I still believe in it now. And not only that, but I think Scottie has looked better defensively, as well. I'm curious what you think of the young star.
I 100% agree. I think it's funny that you mentioned the duo, like the dynamic way that they play, because the way that they connect with each other on offense is just so much fun to watch. You can see that when Scottie has the ball in like the high post area, top of the key. Like it's Pascal that's kind of moving off ball and trying to probe on the inside, and vice versa, right? Same kind of idea. And it's cool because like I had that thread in the summer, but obviously like it's this dual-headed dragon. It's terrifying because they can both do similar things, but they don't like clash with one another when they're on the court. It's actually now you have double the trouble, right? I don't know what's that. Yeah,
Oh,
yeah, what is it? What is it again? I'm trying
the
to think of
double
it. Yeah.
dragon is it what
Yeah,
Max
yeah.
said? Yeah, yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah. So it's like similar. It's a lot of ways it is like that. So I think in terms of Scottie, and you know what? You mentioned the finishing at the rim. That's why he's so that plus the playmaking is what makes him so interesting as a roller. I know a lot of people have mentioned that on Twitter. I see it on my timeline a lot, but like that is 100% accurate. Just the fact that like, look, he can make a play in that short roll area, but he's also such a threat to just try to go through your chest, right? And finish at the rim. So I don't know. There's so much there with Scottie, whether it be, him as a play finisher and a playmaker, or as a guy who's kind of initiating things. I think we've seen some interesting stuff in the pick and roll as well. Like, I think he's gotten better at that aspect a little bit, although I want to see more. I think like the sky is the limit with the dude. It's just, I hope he stays healthy. I hope this thing isn't too serious. Obviously, I'm sure we'll know in the next couple of days. Because building off of that is such a big part to this. Is like you've kind of springboarded yourself to start the year. You're kind of finding rhythm and figuring out where you are in the hierarchy of things. It's like you don't want to fall out of that and be put on the wayside until you come back. It's unfortunate. I really hope he is okay. Obviously, we'll see what happens, but yeah, it's tantalizing to imagine like what kind of player he'll end up being.
So we want to talk about micro skills. There's something that Scottie has that nobody else on the team does. And we can think about, I'll probably put the clip up, is that when he takes Gabe Vincent to the basket and he kind of like that step through, it's not even a drop step really, but he's like stepping through him. You'll notice this with Scottie and we'll compare it to maybe OG and Pascal, is OG and Pascal when they're driving guy to the basket, just because of how they operate, how they've always operated, they keep the ball low and they're using their shoulder, right?
So high.
Yes.
Yeah.
You see it. They're using their shoulder, right? Scottie is so strong in that lower half that he drives guys with the outside of his hip, that knee. He moves these guys with his legs. He keeps the ball above his head as he bulldozes these guys. No chance at a dig. No chance at a contest. This is why Fred VanVleet, when guys try to bully him, gets those stops. It's why Kyle got those stops. Okay, as soon as you get clearance, as soon as you get me out, my hand is going down. Bop, gonna strip the ball. Scottie on smalls, even on some wings, is so strong and such a bully. You don't get that. And like he just keeps the ball high, double clutches, pops it up. He's the counters he has, and this is about like being a unique mover in the NBA, that people don't know how to guard you because they're like, okay, I guard this like this. This is how most players operate. And you have this wing who's like, I won't be bringing the ball down, by the way. It will stay up here, and I'm still strong enough to bowl you over. That's such a unique tool in his toolkit for the future, especially on a team that early on has been saying like, hey, we're going to run a ton of pick and roll, a ton of weave action. If you switch on to Pascal, put a small guy there, see what happens. It's been really bad for the other team. And that's like Pascal and Scottie being able to do that in those actions. It's like, I really like that duo because, not to get too far off topic, but remember the Houston Rockets and the Golden State Warriors, the 27 straight missed threes?
Yeah. Yeah.
Scottie Barnes does not fit that ethos. But if Scottie Barnes had been playing against those Warriors with those Rockets, they would have tossed it into him, and that scoring drought would not have been there because he would have abused somebody. And it's like, not that Scottie is better now than, prime Eric Gordon or something like that, but it's just it's nice to have that counter where you're not getting caught up in the new NBA of like, okay, we're getting run off the line and we're getting to 18 feet. You got to make that shot or move it over to the other side of the court, and the defense gets to catch up, because that's what defenses are great at now, is catching up. And Scottie is like, I don't care if you catch up. Catch up to me. I'll put you in the hoop. And Pascal, there's a similar thing going on there. They're bullies. And I know people don't like watching bully ball, but I tell you what, I loved watching those Rockets that love to isolate. I did. And it's pretty rewarding to watch dudes get after it the way that Scottie and Pascal do in particular. I'm not the they're running more screening actions for Pascal this year. Maybe they're not logging them as pick and rolls because they're kind of turning into those isolations. But Pascal, there's more mismatches this year for sure, and he's feasting on them.
Yeah. I wonder if there's something to be said about Scottie and like his counter that he's trying to develop with the mid-range jumper too, because yeah, he is like he's bullying guys, but at the same time, if there's a guy that might be a little bit, bigger than him or maybe stronger than him that isn't letting him create that advantage, then he's also becoming a little bit more adept at that pull up, which is from the same area that Pascal is doing his work right now, by the way. It's just interesting to me that like they're actually sort of becoming very similar players, just in the way that they play, but also in the way that they counter like some of the things that the defenses give them.
Mm-hmm. Precious and the defense, I think, are tied together somewhat.
Yeah.
Precious really elevated the defense last night, and he also added quite a bit to the offense. I'm curious your thoughts on Precious through 3 games, because I know it's been a mixed bag.
Punching gaps, baby. I thought, shout out Samson Folk. No, but like the Heat game was his best game because I thought his shot diet just made the most sense. Whether it be like in rotation, he's the guy in the corner, wide open kind of corner threes, or it's the punching the gap, like attacking the closeout and then getting an easy layup, or like finishing around the basket, or even he had that one where he kind of stopped short, baseline pull up jumper, which was really nice. Yeah.
He's had, I think he's made 3 of those this year. I think he's taken 6 of those shots.
Not bad.
A great return, because again, it's a similar, he's way more fluid. He looks like a big guard. Scottie and Pascal are both herky jerky, kind of weirdos. They're great. They succeed at it. But, Precious is the one, like that left-handed dribble, getting a guy on his hip, getting to a spot, stop and pop. You look at that and you're like, that's a lot of fluidity, and there's a little bit of touch there too. And it's not even necessarily punching a gap, right? Like we have that play, I believe it was against Kyle. They're on his hip. The ball is dead and stopped with Precious. And Precious is kind of triple threading, sees that he's being played to his left hand. He's like, you're on my hip. You're going about 16 feet deeper than you originally planned. So welcome to that. And then gets to his spot, stop and pop, hit it down the stretch of that game last night. That's something that OG can do, but it'll look weird. That's something that Pascal will do. That's something that Scottie can do. The fact that Precious can do it, I think, is a really, really big deal, along with the outside shooting.
The handle, the agility, and like the balance that he has is kind of what you hope OG ends up developing. If you could like morph those two into one player, they would be a terrifying basketball player. But I think, man, in terms of what you expect from him offensively, that Miami game probably is the best indicator of like, hey, how can he have a good offensive outing? It's just like reading what the defense gives him, using his size, using his athleticism to get to the rim. These are the things that just like what we saw from him in the second half of last season that he really thrived on and banked on. I'm not really worried about the, like, he's kind of trying to create his own shot. I remember he had that one play against, was it Cleveland or Brooklyn? I can't remember, but like he stopped short, and then the floater was a little short as well. Right. He created the advantage. He kind of got the bump, but the actual floater itself was short. And I don't really mind that because, like, hey, you created the advantage, right? Sure, the shot didn't fall, but like that's bound to happen. The advantage is there, right?
We also saw just that play against Joel Embiid became drive down to the right hand, pump. Everyone probably remembers this play, step through, left-handed finish. If he can do that on Embiid, he's going to do that on other people. And Precious is also a guy that, because he's so big and people aren't expecting that like interplay of like pump and go, or even the isolation beating a guy, is that Precious is also a guy who doesn't receive a lot of help side. It's usually just him versus one dude. And similar to Gary, right? Except Precious is going to the free throw rate, the attempts at the rim are going to be a lot higher. The shooting isn't going to be near the same. But he's also a guy who he has a lot of one-on-one time near the rim. And for how often he seems to be able to transport himself there when he's on form, that's a really, really big deal. Those touch shots that seem to be the undeniable fuel of the Raptors between Scottie, Pascal, and depending on how well Precious progresses. I mean, it's such a funky team, dude. I really enjoy watching them. The droughts are a little bit frustrating right now because I think they have better counters this year than they did last year.
Yeah.
They're just maybe not being as proactive with how they attack these droughts as they should be. But that goes back to probably that end of bench stuff, which is probably what we should talk about, is that Koloko, Delano Banton, Thad Young, these guys. Koloko, for what it's worth, has been better than I would have expected.
Yeah.
I think that sometimes people are like, oh, like he gets blocks, he's long, and that means like that these minutes are good. I don't like that Nick Nurse. I don't like that Nick Nurse is playing Koloko over Precious. I think that like
I
I
agree.
understand. Now here's the thing. This is just the okay, put this guy on the court thing. I don't have to deal with the, if Precious keeps playing bad. I just saw Precious play good. I don't have to worry about like the interpersonal stuff that Nick Nurse does or setting a precedent for like you have to hustle here, do this and that kind of stuff. But I think it's nonsensical from like putting the guys on the floor who win you minutes to put Koloko as the first big out there instead of Precious. I don't agree with that. It's just when they won against Cleveland, Koloko, like it was that Precious started playing more down the stretch and stuff like that.
I'd wager that, and this was kind of what I was going to mention with Precious too. I'd wager that when Chris comes back, that changes.
They're a great duo. Hell of a duo.
Oh man, they're so much fun together, and I think that that plays a big part in this. It's like, look, those two together, and they did it towards the end of the season. They would sub on together, right? Precious and Chris, you throw those two guys on, you get a bunch of offensive rebounds, win the possession battle in those minutes. Like that's the way that they thrived, and I think that will change what we've seen. But I do have a Koloko lineup thing for you, and I know you saw it. Yeah, look, yes, they've played, what's it called, 6 minutes, 5 minutes together, but I don't care.
No, 6 possessions, dude.
Yes, it's 6 possessions, and it's what? I think it's 4 minutes. It's literally 4 minutes. It might be even less, actually, realistically, because NBAstats.com is probably rounding up. But listen, Koloko and the starters minus Gary Trent Jr., a plus 85.7 net rating. Look, yes, I know.
Play those guys from finish, win the game by 85 points.
Yeah,
obviously.
Exactly. Why not? Yeah. No, but I think there is like something to be said about like having a guy with that amount of size. And to your point, Koloko is right now just size, just a big dude. I don't think there is a whole lot of, like spatial awareness in terms of the defense stuff. Like, yes, he knows some stuff from college. He was a great defender in college. So some of that stuff is applied, but yeah, he still has to learn, kind of backpedaling in a pick and roll and like knowing the space and like figuring out where the lob is coming from while also trying to like contain the guard, playing that drop. Like that's obviously things that he's going to have to figure out. But at the same time, I do think the size plays a factor because the Raptors don't have a guy that's big, that's that big. He's 7'2". He just has a massive wingspan. So like, these are the things that could win you some minutes. Now, I agree with you. Precious should not be behind him in the pecking order here. I think Precious should play ahead of him. And I think Chris inevitably will play ahead of him when he gets healthy. But I mean, in terms of like giving you 10 minutes, I maybe there is a spot for him here. Maybe I'm getting ahead of myself 3 games in, and like maybe 905 minutes do make sense down the road because giving him that experience, giving him more time and more reps and like just being able to play a 40-minute game. Yeah, that's going to be huge. But I do think there's a way for him to fill a need on this roster. And I'm interested to see how that happens through the rest of the season because I don't know. I really don't know what we'll see as we go forward. But so far, it hasn't been as bad or as like awful as I thought it would be coming out the gate.
Yeah, and let me say, just for I know Koloko is the darling. Not only was he, unjustly tackled by Caleb Martin, wrestling fanatic. Koloko, I loved the way he approached that situation. And Koloko, I think I said this at the start, but he's been better than I expected. He's also, when he got drafted, Nick Nurse was like 905 for this guy. From what Nick Nurse saw, he's softened on that. We've seen Koloko get minutes ahead of Precious, and me saying like, "Hey, let's maybe chill on the Koloko stuff," is not me trying to dissent upon anybody's Koloko excitement. I think you have a lot to be excited about. He's not necessarily backpedaling as you said, but when he gets sideways on the court, he's a pretty good mover. It's functional length, whereas a lot of guys that big aren't able to use it. When he's rotating as the low man just for contests, not in like the 2-versus-1 stuff, I think that's looked good. He competes on the offensive glass. That's all great. This just pales in comparison to what I think Precious is capable
does.
of.
Yeah, absolutely.
So that's all I mean to say. Koloko, for anybody who's excited, well done. You're excited about an exciting young player. So good for that. Banton has struggled at the things that he was supposed to struggle at. I think the counters were there in preseason, but again, preseason versus regular season. I spent a lot of time, people listen to this podcast, talking about the Banton of it all. Is like, hey, he has counters right now. Like that in and out dribble is moving players. He's getting downhill. Some of the sneakier set actions, those I call them get actions. In the post game press conference, Delano called them touch actions, which makes sense. Like just being really proactive in getting rescreens and like adjusting how players use their screen, how they're defending you. He was really diligent, really good. That has not been the case early in the season, which isn't a referendum on him. It's just that the NBA is hard. And when you don't provide a lot of the dangerous point of attack stuff, it's hard to make a defense move, which I think we're currently stuck on with Delano.
I thought he's been mostly okay on defense.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah. I think like he hasn't, because last year he was a pretty big negative on that end. And I think that's a plus to at least get him on the court, and then from there you can maybe try to figure out. Like I think a big thing with Delano and even Malachi is just like what lineups they're in, like what kind of squad around them makes sense. And with Malachi, the interesting thing is he had those couple of shots that just went in, rotation, he's wide open, nobody's really going, and they were helping off of him too on offense. So like he just got a bunch of open shots and he ended up hitting a couple of them. Good, like that. But that needs to be a consistent thing. Like the shot making is something that is huge for Malachi. It's also pretty big for Delano. Like if he can kind of get that catch and shoot shot going a little bit more, just be a little bit more adept at that, there is a spot for them in the rotation. I think the thing with that's interesting with Malachi is that he was kind of getting bullied there on defense. The Heat realized very quickly that it was like, hey, this guy is a clear size mismatch with anybody else on the roster. Let's go and attack him on pretty much every single possession. We'll see what happens, though. I think maybe, the shooting, if it sticks, then Malachi will end up kind of jumping Delano in this pecking order. Who knows? But
probably.
Again, we haven't seen the shooting really stick with Malachi, though.
If the shooting sticks with Malachi, not only that, but I think Malachi probably with in-game reps would become average to above average guarding the pick and roll ball handlers of the league. That's my expectation. He's not as good in rotation as a lot of other guys. He's not as good in rotation as Delano. For like I talked about that Pascal Siakam flat-footed on a rotation that he knew was his. Delano last year, he was never flat-footed on a rotation he knew was his. This is just like if he missed a rotation, he was kind of looking around like, oh, damn, that was me. But Delano cares about that end of the floor. So when he's like locked into the possession, sees how his defenders around him are moving and knows when he's like, okay, I'm the guy, he cares. And he's long and he's quick. Delano isn't like blindingly quick, but he's quick for his size. And that you don't necessarily need to be like a first step guy on defense. You just have to be proactive and make reads. And Delano, for what it's worth, I think has been doing that. The on-ball stuff remains to be seen. He's not often put in those positions, but the off-ball stuff, I think Delano, there's plenty to be encouraged about. Thad, just to kind of like squeak him in there, I think Thad is a guy who's multiplicative. Yeah.
I believe it.
He compounds advantage when advantages are being created. Thad is good if he's playing with good players, but if everybody on the floor is limited, suddenly Thad is like, oh, what do you guys want me to do? Like I'm this connector piece,
Yeah.
And he's been put in these awkward, like offensively limited lineups where he's taking some more rushed threes. There's like he's kind of getting bailed out on above the break and having to move to these rote actions and stuff like that. And even defensively hasn't looked that good in some spurts. And he just has
Father
to.
time has definitely caught up to him a little bit here. I mean, look, it's only 3 games again, so it's like tough to really extrapolate too much. But yeah, it does seem like, he's not LeBron James. At that age, it's not going to look and feel the same as it was even 2 or 3 years ago. I think there is like he's a step late on certain rotations. He's a step not there. Like, yeah, but also his activity, like just his hands have proven to be pretty damn good so far. So I think there's still something there when it comes to that.
He just has to be, once the rotation is more set, guys are healthy. Like Thad with Chris Boucher, Precious, and let's say they do that lineup, right? Let's say it's Pascal, Thad, Boucher, Precious, and like maybe Scottie, maybe Otto Porter Jr., maybe OG.
Yeah.
Thad in that lineup is going to be probably awesome defensively and awesome offensively. That's probably going to hum. Thad with, the guys who he's usually been playing with, it's a tough ask. It's just there's not enough talent initiating. So he doesn't get to make those quick decisions against a compromised defense where he's making reads that a lot of players won't. Mm-hmm. And defensively, there's more ground coverage. So his route efficiency, where he's cheating here and cheating there, actually shows up a lot more because the guys cover ground and they're able to do more effective defending. Whereas now it's like, if he's cheating, maybe the defense finds out he's cheating like a lot quicker. And so that's kind of, I think, the Thad of it all. Raptor stuff. Is there anything else you want to talk about? Do you have thoughts on the Caleb Martin thing? Do you?
I guess the only thing is like, and to your point, it was ridiculous that Koloko was ejected. I mean, I thought that was wild. I mean, look, what is this? A tables, ladders, chairs match? He literally put him through a chair, like literally speared him into a chair. But look, I think there's this like grandizing, like they're making it so big with the Miami Heat fans. They're just like, kind of giving this glitz and glamour to the fact that Caleb, culture. That is pretty wild, man. That's a pretty wild, thing to be proud of. But I don't know. It's also interesting because the Raptors are on the other side of this, and the Cavs fans on opening night were very, very angry about the whole Darius Garland thing. And now it's just funny to see that like the Raptors are on both sides of this, so to speak. Although I don't think there's much to be taken away from the whole Garland eye thing as well. But yeah, that's the only thing I'll say.
Yeah, so I think the Garland eye thing is similar to the Hero play, right? Scottie's injury. Like Scottie was airborne, right? Hero jumps in, and like that's not a dirty play. It's just not very clever by Hero. Hero is like, I can jump in beforehand. He was in the circle, he came late, and that ends up being kind of dangerous to Scottie's well-being because there's not much airspace to land. And, it's just tough. That's not a dirty play by Hero. And Gary Trent Jr.'s play on Garland is just like, damn, like my finger hit your eye, bro. That sucks. I'm really sorry.
Yeah.
And like, it's just kind of, Gary, quite frankly, I have no idea why Gary would do such a thing. It's a terrible play. Like, as far as I'm looking at, like, say I'm the coach who's comes in the film room after, and I say that, I bring that up, Gary, why did you think you were going to do this? You landed out of bounds afterwards. So what happens if you stole the ball here, bro? Like, what, what's the thought process? It's just like Fred's, was it his 4th foul where he pushed Jimmy, I believe it was, in the backcourt. It's like, what's the thought process here, brother? Let's think a little bit. And but Martin just tackled the dude.
He definitely doesn't have any fans in Toronto after the whole Scottie thing last year.
Yeah.
And compounding that with this, it's a recipe for Raptors fans to hate you, man. So
yeah, and so I will say, I said this on the reaction podcast, but the view from behind Martin, it looks like Koloko grabs Martin,
dragging him down. Yeah.
When you go to the other views, you realize that Koloko perhaps was grabbing Martin. It doesn't have to be friendly or anything, but Koloko wasn't able to stand up. Like, Martin was standing over top of him. That by the time Koloko's getting up, he's like leaned back like Fat Joe. You know what I mean? he's probably like, I'm just trying not to fall over, dude, because I'm gonna
Yeah.
look like an absolute, like, I don't want to let you punk me, that you do this, you come stand over me and I fall over again.
Yeah.
Like Miami Heat fans would start putting up murals of Caleb Martin around, like, Dade County and stuff like that. He doesn't want that. It'll be like a new, in Miami, it'll be like the Iverson over Ty Lue moment. They're like,
Right.
yeah, Caleb Martin. And he's like, I can't let this dude punk me. And then so he kind of raps, and then Caleb Martin is like, it's go time, and puts him through a chair. It's just tough scenes, dude. But
Yeah.
after it happened, I watched you've met a leg. He
Yeah.
was watching UFC all day yesterday, and I was watching this ground and pound stuff. And when I saw the tackle and saw how much room Koloko had, I was like, he could have ground and pounded,
Yeah.
Martin if he wanted to. But he
Counter
didn't.
him into a submission.
He was sitting in the chair like this, waiting for everything to calm down. I think like it looked like he almost had Martin in a headlock. They were just sitting there. He's like, "Come on, guys, what are we doing here? Please,
It's
senseless
honestly
violence."
somewhat impressive that he tackled someone that's 7'2". Like, I mean, I get it. Caleb Martin's pretty tall too. He's like 6'6", 6'7", whatever. But like,
Roughly our height.
yeah, exactly. Yeah, common height. But like a 7'2" man, you were grabbing him by the waist and tackling him into a chair. Put that on your resume, Caleb Martin.
That's what I'm saying. He's going to wrestling after this, dude.
Yeah.
Him and Aaron Baines are gonna link up. They're gonna be like a tag team. It's
My God.
crazy.
Yeah.
I feel like that's most of the Raptor stuff from the first 3 games. Yeah.
Yeah, I think so. I think we've covered pretty much everything there
Yeah.
can be to cover. Yeah.
Does it feel like it's time for us to sell ourselves to the fans, listeners?
Maybe. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. I'll let you go first. If you want to do the spiel once again,
Yeah, look, folks, if you're still tapped in,
They're tapped in. They're tapped in.
I'm moving over to the SDPN Sports network. I got to figure out how I'm going to say that every time. But at SDPN Sports, I am heading over there, doing NBA reporting there, making video content. Podcasts will be coming in the next couple of weeks. We got a newsletter rolling through. It will be NBA content, but it will be Raptors infused. There will be a lot of cool stuff. I am excited because, as you know me, Samson, even outside of work, I would love to do funny things and creative things and, really show off that side of myself. And SDPN is giving me the possibility to do that. So I'm very excited to do it. Let's roll with it. Roll Tide. There you go.
Yeah. Is this the return of the sketch comedy?
It might be. It might be. I'm
a fan.
We'll see. Yeah.
I am a fan. Listener for myself. You probably listen to this. If you're listening to this episode, you probably listen a lot of the time. Thank you for listening to us so often. Thanks for letting me speak to you about the Raptors. But more than anything, please let me write to you about the Raptors, like a lover in during the war. It's 1916. Let me write to you. And unfortunately, that's going to cost money. My written work, along with Louis Zatzman, along with Aiden Moss over at Raptors Republic, is paywalled this year. And this is so that the website doesn't have like an insane amount of ads for a shrinking amount of money. Ad revenue has completely blew up on the internet. It's in a very bad spot. Raptors Republic does not, none of my work with Raptors Republic will promote gambling or anything like that. It's just me, the written stuff. If you subscribe, you don't get ads. You get a quicker website. The website is quicker overall because some people subscribe, so there's less ads on the website. And you get my work, most of all. I am in the locker rooms. I am at practices. I'm at the home games this year. And I think my work is better than it's ever been. It's $6 a month, and it keeps Raptors Republic alive. And Raptors Republic is no longer in a place where it is the minor leagues, I don't think. Raptors Republic... I know that's what people say. They're like, oh yeah, you do Raptors Republic and then you go on to do other stuff. But Raptors Republic has such a large readership and has such a big representation in Toronto Raptors media that, and not to be too egotistical, but if you want to know how the Raptors offense works, how their defense works, play calls, the real analysis of it, nobody else, as far as I know, in the blogosphere or anything like that, does that type of work. Louis Zatzman dives into the numbers better than anybody. Blake Murphy is no longer writing about the Raptors. The best written work in my mind is Raptors Republic, and it costs money this year. So this is
real talk. Real talk. Hey, hold on. Hey, can I curse on here? Can you beat me out?
Sure,
Yeah.
do your thing.
Listen, if you are not subscribed to Raptors Republic, what are you doing? Let's just be real here, folks. No, I mean, look, you've just listened to an hour and 10 minutes of a Raptors podcast, and you mean to tell me that you can't put out $6 to go ahead and just subscribe and listen to this man's work or read his work? Listen, I am telling you, the man is a gold mine for Raptors information. If you want to go ahead and hold on, Samson. All right. If you want to go ahead and gallivant your opinions on Twitter, be smarter than everybody else, act like a know-it-all, okay? And be like, hey, listen, look at this. Did you hear about this? Yeah, you could do it with this paywall. God damn it, you could pay for it and learn. All right. That's all I'm gonna say. If you seriously though, if you like the Raptors, how are you not tuned in already to Raptors Republic, dog? It's a republic. It's a republic for crying out loud. That's all I gotta say.
Yeah, thank you for the kind words. It's just the start of the season, so this is the biggest plug you'll hear on this podcast for what it's worth. I won't be doing this every time. No worries, listeners.
I will be every time I show up. I promise
Yeah,
you.
this is the full-hearted plug, the pitch to say, hey, what we do is important and good and worthy of money. So thanks for tuning in. It's been an absolute blast to talk to you, S, for as long as we have, to talk about all the pertinent Raptors news that has been ongoing. I believe I'll be here after the Heat game on Monday. I hope everyone enjoyed listening. S, thank you for coming on. But
Appreciate you, man.
if you're on YouTube, subscribe, like the video, all that good stuff. If you're on the podcast channel, just keep listening, dude. Thanks, dude, woman, anybody, anything that you want to call yourself, that you are.
Damn right.
Keep doing your thing. Keep listening in, and thank you so much for tuning in. Whether you got into this in the morning or at night, have a blessed day and goodbye.